Are you looking for a podcast that contains bizarre theories, strange facts, and some out-of-this-world opinions? Then this podcast is for you. Listener discretion is advised, especially if you trust the government.
Conspiracy.
Welcome back, conspiracy lovers, to another episode of Conspiracy, the show where no story is too strange, no theory too far-fetched, and no one is safe from our deep dives into the unknown. I'm Ash, your host, your guide into the world of conspiracies and occasional devil's advocate. And if you're new around here, welcome to the rabbit hole. Just a reminder, we drop new episodes every Wednesday, so smash that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. As you can tell by the title of today's episode, we're talking about Pizzagate. Yes, the infamous conspiracy theory that blew up in 2016 involving secret codes, dodgy emails, basement dungeons, and of course, pizza, which may never taste the same again after this episode. In today's episode, we'll be covering how a Washington DC pizzeria became the supposed HQ of an elite child trafficking ring, the bizarre coded emails from John Podesta that sound less like political correspondence and more like someone ordering very weird toppings, the wider connections between Pizzagate, Hollywood, and the global elite, including disturbing real-world cases. And we're also going to the Netherlands for the Dutch Bodegraven case, a European twist that makes this whole thing even weirder. You're gonna want to hear this one. Now, Pizzagate is no ordinary internet hoax. Some say it's the blueprint for how real corruption gets covered up, turned into a crazy conspiracy, and no one will take it seriously. Others say it's a modern day witch hunt fueled by paranoia, memes, and people who spend far too much time on Reddit. By the end of the episode, you'll have learned how a pizza place became the center of a global scandal, what happens when an internet theory spills into the real world, and why I now feel slightly uneasy whenever I walk past a Domino's. So grab a slice, settle in, and let's get to the crust of the matter. So Pizzagate started when WikiLeaks dumped a bunch of emails from John Podesta, former White House Chief of Staff, and Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman. He was thrust into the spotlight when his emails were hacked and leaked to the public in one of the biggest political data dumps of our time. The hack was attributed to Russian operatives, but what really caught the attention of conspiracy theorists wasn't the political strategy or the backroom deals. It was the language, specifically the bizarre, unusual phrases that seemed to allude to something much darker. And we're talking very dark, as always on Conspiracy. So, first off, let's discuss the terms that made everyone's eyebrows raise. The idea is that the emails that were being sent were using coded language and a kind of secret menu for things that can't exactly be said out loud, if you get what I mean. And probably shouldn't also appear in your normal email chain. It's not really what you send after the, as per my last email, also I would like to order this. You know what I'm saying? So, here's a list of the suspicious terms, and let me tell you, if this is true, my God. These are some of the terms, right? So you got pizza. Seems a pretty normal thing to send an email, but when it goes with all the others, apparently pizza is the code for girl. Hot dog, that one means boy. Cheese, that refers to a little girl. Pasta, of course, that means little boy. Why wouldn't it? Ice cream, this apparently means a male prostitute. And then you have walnut, it's a person of color. And then there's map, which is allegedly referring to semen. Lovely, right? And last but certainly not least, sauce. And sauces supposedly means orgy. Yeah. So you got pizza, hot dog, cheese, pasta, ice cream, walnut, map, and sauce. All of which mean coded words for some fucked up shit. So it does sound like a bizarre list, and why use these terms, but that's exactly what it's supposed to be. It's the whole point of it, right? To the casual eye, it's just odd language, but when you look closer, some folks think it's a secret code, a code that links certain high-ranking people to a much darker world. Now, if that's not enough to make you think, maybe this is a little bit suspicious, well, let's talk about the actual emails. So, some of them were, let's just say, not your average political correspondence. So, there's this one email where Podesta and others were discussing hot dog stands. Yeah. So, I don't know why you'd be discussing hot dog stands on a political email chain, but it's definitely not about selling hot dogs on a street corner. Because, as I mentioned, hot dog refers to boy. And then there was another email discussing late night pasta dinners, as you do. So that sounds pretty innocent, right? Let's go for some late night pasta dinner. But as I mentioned, pasta also means little boy. And it's not just, oh, let's go to a boy or a little boy, it's illicit activities. So you can use your brain to put that together. I don't think I need to go into maybe what that might mean, right? Then you've got one email that talks about a heated swimming pool, a pretty innocuous phrase on the surface. Yet again, it is believed to be another veiled reference to underage children being used for entertainment purposes. These motherfuckers. And then you've got the infamous mention of spirit cooking, a term that sends chills down anyone with a bit of knowledge about occult practices. Spirit cooking is associated with a performance artist named Marina Abramovich, and it's tied to a series of ritualistic activities that some believe are linked to satanic rituals. These phrases were all mentioned in emails that were leaked. And on terms of the satanic rituals, we will be covering those in a future episode, so hold on for that one. So what might it all mean? Well, in the eyes of many, this is no ordinary email leak. These suspicious phrases are seen as proof of a larger, much more sinister operation, an underground network of powerful individuals, some of whom may be involved in child trafficking, exploiting vulnerable children for their own pleasures. Freaks. The email leak was, to say the least, an unsettling glimpse into a world that many would rather remain in the shadows. But as we've seen time and time again here on Conspiracy, when the truth begins to leak out, we have no choice but to dive in headfirst and try and uncover some truths. So, are the Podesta emails a smoking gun, or is this just a case of overactive imaginations connecting dots that aren't really there? I'll let you decide on that. But one thing's for sure, these emails sparked a conversation that's not going anywhere anytime soon. And this wasn't just random speculations, right? These emails were connected to a real DC pizzeria called Comet Ping Pong, which, as you might guess, became the epicenter of the theory. So if you've been paying attention or even had the internet in the last decade or so, you've probably heard about the bizarre and chilling claims about a Washington DC pizza joint called Comet Ping Pong. To be honest, Comet Ping Pong for a pizza shop is already a bit sus, to be honest. I'm not even going to lie. Who calls their fucking pizza shop Comet Ping Pong, first of all? But anyway, well, it's a little spot where you can grab a slice and maybe play some ping pong. So there we go. That's why, if you're thinking like I was, why the bloody hell would someone call their pizza shop Comet Ping Pong? It's because you can grab a slice of pizza and play ping pong. Okay, mystery solved. But according to a lot of people, this place wasn't just serving pizza, of course. It was allegedly serving something far darker, child trafficking. Now, hold on, before you roll your eyes and think, Ash, come on, it's a bit too much. Let's break it down, right? So the story behind Comet Ping Pong is not as innocent as it seems. The whole Pizzagate narrative started swirling around in 2016, and it was tied to this pizzeria in particular, right? So the question is, what made people start looking at this pizza place like it was the epicenter of a child trafficking operation? So let's get into it. First up, the pizzeria's owner, James Alefantis. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not exactly keen on ranking people's power in DC. But when you're named the 49th most powerful person in Washington by GQ, you're kind of asking for some scrutiny. Alephantis, the owner of Comet Ping Pong, became an unlikely focal point in this whole mess because, sure, it's weird to get that high of a ranking for just owning a pizza joint, but, it is DC. Anything's possible, right? But it wasn't just his ranking that set off alarms at all. No. So there were some really strange details about the pizzeria itself that raised more eyebrows than a flaming hot pepperoni. If you Google it, you can look at the artwork in the pizzeria. And, I mean, it's a bit off, if you ask me. And that's exactly what some other people thought when they saw the artwork adorning the walls of Comet Ping Pong. The art featured disturbing imagery, like images that didn't exactly scream, hey, this is a family-friendly joint where we come and play ping pong. So some pieces had very questionable themes that hinted at something sinister. And honestly, you can go have a Google, look at them, make up your own mind. I think pretty dark stuff to have in a pizzeria. But that's not all. There were also allegations of coded references in their social media posts as well, like strange symbols and phrases that seem to point to something going on beneath the surface. And those symbols and phrases are linked with, pedophilic networks, such as the swirly triangle. So the swirly triangle, again, you can, if you need more clarification on this, just go to Google and just type in the pedophile triangle symbol, and it will come up, and you'll notice that Comet Ping Pong's logo, before they changed it, they've changed it now, so you have to do a bit of search, but Comet Ping Pong's logo before that featured this triangular swirl symbol, right? So, again, suspiciously convenient, right? And yeah, many other symbols that are associated with the pedophilic network can be seen in some of the social media network posts that Comet Ping Pong was putting out there. So were they trying to attract more customers that were not that interested in an Hawaiian pizza, let's say? And by the looks of the guest list at this place, it might have worked, but we'll get into that in a little bit. One of the core theories surrounding Comet Ping Pong was the idea that it had a hidden basement. The story goes that there was this supposed basement where all the illicit activities were happening, but that basement was never found, right? That's not to say it's not there, it was just undiscoverable. Whether that means it's behind a very secure door or whatever it might be, this basement was never found. Whether it's all speculation and it's all nonsense, also an option, right? And so when Comet Ping Pong put out there that they didn't have a basement and these things were not happening, well, this did make some folks go a bit crazy because they started to then question, if there's no basement, then what else is going on? Is it just a front? Is it a cover? Are they actually hiding the basement? And let's just say one person went a little far to try and uncover the truth. I would not recommend anyone does this out there if you're listening to my podcast. If you want to, find out some more truth, I wouldn't recommend you go this far. But Edgar Madison Welch, he did make some headlines in 2016 when he drove to Comet Ping Pong and he took a gun and he started to shoot inside of Comet Ping Pong, determined that he was going to rescue the children that he thought were being held there. Turns out there was no children there at the time, and then he was sent to prison for 4 years. So, yeah, he didn't actually find anything. Let's just be clear there. But, of course, if someone shows up at your door and you're hiding something, you're going to do your best to hide it, right? You're not going to be like, oh yeah, it's here. But yeah, he did just find an empty pizzeria with some ping pong tables. Not exactly the child trafficking ring that he imagined, right? So, of course, the mainstream media then quickly dismissed Pizzagate as a baseless conspiracy, ridiculous hoax that was cooked up in the fevered minds of internet users. They called it a distraction, fake news story. But let me tell you, how many times have we seen so-called conspiracy theories get dismissed like this, only to be revisited years later with new evidence, and then they find out something was happening? And I mean, the connection that this pizzeria has, in particular, with all of these elites, you're seeing people like Clinton, Anthony Weiner, Huma Abedin, Epstein, like they're all on the list of the clientele of this pizza place. And why would all of these people just go into this one pizza place and loving it so much that they're writing corporate emails, political correspondence emails to each other, talking about how good the pasta and the pizza in the swimming pool on the hot dog stand is? Like, come on, there's something a bit sus, right? So even though there was no basement and the media say it's all a hoax, let's keep going with it and dive into one of the most explosive connections in the world of political scandals, the Clinton Weiner connection. Weiner. Yeah, so we're talking about Anthony Weiner, the disgraced politician who became infamous for, let's just say, not the best decision making when it comes to personal matters. So his laptop was seized by the FBI, revealing some shocking, potentially incriminating evidence that links Weiner to the Clinton campaign in ways that nobody saw coming. So let's start with the basics. Weiner's laptop. Back in 2016, the FBI got their hands on a laptop that once belonged to this former congressman. And on that laptop, they found emails between Weiner and Huma Abedin, Hillary Clinton's longtime aide. Now, these weren't just your typical work-related emails. Some of them allegedly contained evidence of child exploitations. That's right, disturbing content that raised some serious red flags. And the plot thickens. Among the files on the laptop, there was also a folder labeled life insurance. Now, doesn't that sound something like you'd find in a spy thriller or a conspiracy theory? Well, according to some, this folder contains sensitive information, logs of flights made by Bill and Hillary Clinton to Jeffrey Epstein's island. Yeah, Epstein. Shock. The allegations here are that this life insurance folder was holding damning evidence against some of the most powerful people in the world, including the Clintons, implicating them in Epstein's operations. And of course, according to many, this folder also included a lot of evidence linking himself, Clintons, and many other political people to Comet Pizza. So it all keeps coming back to this Comet Pizza. And I can't believe we are now 8 years post Pizzagate and there's still no solid evidence. Like, everyone is so hush hush about it. There's not a single leak, not a single whistleblower on it. People have tried. People really have tried. And we'll get into that a little bit later on as well. But the conspiracy itself does take a dark turn when you start talking about the FBI's involvement. Of course, there's always some federal government bureau involved in some shady shit, right? So the bureau themselves didn't actually handle the Pizzagate situation with urgency or transparency as you might expect them to do. I mean, I don't know about it anymore, but people just expected, this would be quite transparent, the public would know about it. It's a public case, and it involves children. I mean, come on. Well, the allegations come that the FBI actually covered up the evidence found on Weiner's laptop, allowing powerful figures like the Clintons to escape any real consequence for their alleged connections to Pizzagate or Epstein's trafficking operation. So, what do you think? Do you think the FBI has the ability to cover up and protect these high ranking officials? Or is this all just a series of coincidental, highly suspicious events that have been blown way out of proportion? Some believe the truth was buried to keep those in power from facing the music, but what do you believe? Let me know in the comments. Also, we have to talk about the fact that this little pizza shop in DC is not just, even if it's just a front and it is the kind of central operation for all of this fucking weird shit going on, we have to discuss that it does just connect some serious, powerful people, from politicians to financiers, with heinous crimes. And it's not just speculation. There are real confirmed cases that we know about that have come to light over the years, each one revealing more disturbing connections. So when we start with one of the most infamous names is Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein had ties to some of the most powerful people in the world, including politicians, celebrities, royalty. But behind all of that glamour, Epstein was trafficking minors for sex, running a sordid operation out of his private island. His connection to high-profile figures raised even more eyebrows as people started asking how someone with so much power was able to get away with it for so long. But, Epstein is just a tip of the iceberg when it comes to it, really. And if you've listened to my part one of Epstein, I go into much more detail about who he was and everything like that. And I'll be finishing my part two of Epstein's case in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that. But let's talk about some other important people that are also connected with this, and connected specifically with Comet Ping Pong, right? So there's also Dennis Hastert, who's the former Speaker of the House. Hastert's a powerful political figure, was convicted of molesting boys while serving as a teacher and a coach before his time in Congress. His case is particularly chilling because it highlights the way that people with influence can use their positions to cover up their crimes until it all comes crashing down and they get done for it. And he's one of the ones that actually did get done for it. We know so many that get away with it. So next one, you've got Robert Menendez, right? So he's a US senator who's been linked to underage sex workers. Menendez was reportedly involved in a sex scandal involving minors, but like many of these high-profile cases, it was just swept under the rug, at least for until it wasn't. So people start asking whether this was yet another example of a powerful person getting away with disgusting behavior because of their status. Then you've got Terry Bean, a Democratic donor who was arrested for sexually assaulting a minor. Bean was an influential figure in Democratic fundraising circles, and his arrest added another layer to the growing suspicion that this wasn't just an isolated problem. It's a pattern, a disturbing network of powerful people involved in abuse. And finally, there's George Nader. He's an advisor to multiple US presidents who was convicted for possessing child pornography. Nader was a key figure in international politics, advising high-level officials on foreign policy, but behind closed doors, he was caught up in a dark world of child exploitation. So what does all of this tell us? Well, it paints a terrifying picture of a world where powerful people seem to be able to hide in plain sight using their status and connections to avoid justice for their crimes. Right? And each of the cases that I just mentioned, and there's so many more if you just do your research on it, each of these cases is a piece of the puzzle, and together they suggest that there is a much larger, more pervasive problem than most of us want to believe. This is a thing, it's real. The people that are doing these heinous crimes are being protected, and this needs to stop. And it's mad to me that we live in this world where we all know this is a thing. And yet, is it that we feel powerless about what to do with it? Is it that we just don't care? It's mad to me, because one thing I think that should be protected more than anything in this world is children. And the fact that people with the most power are able to do these heinous things, it makes me sick. Honestly, it makes me fucking sick. But let's move on. Let's move on because we've got a lot more to cover, right? So let's step into the heart of the beast, Hollywood's dark side. So when you think of Hollywood, you think, glitz, glamour, dreams, TV, film, all the dreams coming true, or like the American dream almost, So, but behind the scenes, there's a much darker undercurrent, and there has been for decades. And I think that now, actually, when you do say Hollywood, 50% of your brain goes, "Ooh, nice films," and the other half goes, "Freaks," like weird motherfuckers. Well, there has been a disturbing pattern of paedophilia, exploitation, and abuse that some insiders have tried to expose over the years, and others have tried to desperately keep hidden, of course. So it's a secretive world where the most vulnerable are preyed upon by the very people who are supposed to be creating a safe space for creativity and art. So let's talk about some of the whistleblowers, the accused, and the figures who have been at the center of these shocking claims. So let's start with two of Hollywood's own who've bravely spoken out about the predatory behavior they witnessed in the industry. You got Corey Feldman and Elijah Wood. Both great actors, by the way. Great actors. Corey Feldman is in my favorite film of all time, The Goonies. I love The Goonies. It's such a fucking good film. And I mean, I've watched it so many times, even as an adult, and I still love it. Apparently, they're making a number two, but this rumor's been going on for so long, and they keep getting my hopes up and then ripping it away. So I'm not holding my breath until I see some actual confirmation. But man, the Goonies is so good. Hey, you guys! Oh man, the truffle shuffle, the truffle shuffle. If you've watched it, let me know in the comments because we need to discuss Goonies. If you haven't watched it, just turn this episode off right now. Go stick it on. Honestly, you won't regret it. It was made in the 80s, but it's fantastic. It's so good. It's so funny. Um, anyway, yeah. So Feldman, he is best known for his roles in 80s classics like The Goonies and Stand By Me. But he's been very vocal about the rampant child exploitations in Hollywood. He claimed that as a young actor, he was surrounded by predators and he's tried to expose the truth about what he and other young stars have endured. And I think that's probably why Goonies 2 has taken so long to be made, is because he really is vocal and has been vocal about what he experienced. And Hollywood's like, someone shut this kid up, like, for once and for all. But he's managed to make it this far, so I think he'll be alright. And then you got Elijah Wood. He's obviously another former child star. Um, Also, he's in so many amazing films. I mean, it's Elijah Wood, isn't he the guy from Lord of the Rings? Like, isn't he? What's his name? Lord of the Rings. Frodo. Is it Frodo? Elijah Wood, and also in Green Street, which is a great British film, by the way. If you really want to watch a good football hooligan British classic, stick on Green Street. Yeah. Great. Well, anyway, Elijah Wood also backed Feldman's claims, calling Hollywood a very sick place and shedding light on the darkness that often lurks behind the shiny surface. Now, while Feldman and Wood have tried to warn the public, there are a few figures who've been directly accused of engaging in these sickening activities themselves. One of the most high profile names, of course, is Kevin Spacey. The once celebrated actor has faced multiple allegations of sexual misconduct, including with minors. Spacey's career has just been completely derailed, as it should. But the accusations were shocking. Some even alleging that he used his position in Hollywood to manipulate and exploit young boys. Yep. Then you got Roman Polanski, of course, the famous director who fled the country after being charged with sexual assault of a 13-year-old girl. Polanski's case is one of the most infamous, and despite his conviction, he's managed to continue working in the industry, which raised some serious questions about Hollywood's willingness to protect its stars, no matter the crime. Yep. And of course, we can't talk about Hollywood's dark side without mentioning Harvey Weinstein. The disgraced film mogul was convicted of sexual assault and harassment, with accusations dating back decades. Weinstein's crimes were so extensive, and many believe his influence allowed him to control the careers of countless women, using his power to coerce them into sexual favors for roles, and in some cases, allegedly targeting minors. He actually appeared in court the other day, didn't he? Maybe about a week ago, saying he needs a retrial because he won't survive in prison much longer. So looks like he's got some hits on his back. So hopefully. So what do you think is actually going on in Hollywood? Like, why is it so fucked up? Why are they so like into these rituals and doing weird shit with minors. Like, what is it about Hollywood? Like, okay, we can talk about, maybe it's run by Satan if you're a believer in Christianity and God and all the rest of it. Then you could say, okay, it's because of Satan. Satan controls that area, and they are sacrificing their souls and all the rest of it. But if you don't believe in God, what do you think it is? It's just sick practices. It's just like, humiliation rituals. Like, to get into the club, you have to do something that's incriminating. So they have like leverage over you, and they can blackmail you into many things, and maybe you pay into a system or something like that. But yeah, what do you think? Why is Hollywood so weird and creepy and fucked up? Why? Or do you believe that it's not? Do you believe that it's all hearsay? Like, that could also be an option. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think about Hollywood? Right, let's step into the world of our favourite people, the government. Because you guessed it, the Pentagon and intelligence agencies have their own share of involvement in these dark conspiracies. No shit. So you'd think the people entrusted with national security would be the last to be caught up in something sinister. But history tells us a different story, doesn't it? So there are some deeply troubling cases that raise serious questions about the extent to which powerful institutions are linked to child trafficking, exploitation, and abuse. One of the most chilling cases is the story of the Finders cult. Right. Now that sounds like it's straight out of a horror movie, like The Finders Cult coming to cinemas this June. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's all too real. The Finders were a group with suspected ties to the CIA, and not just any ties, but a child trafficking operation. In the 1980s, the group was investigated after two children were found in a van claiming that they had been abandoned. Authorities soon learned that the children were part of a much larger network that was allegedly operating under the CIA's radar. What's truly terrifying here is the degree of government involvement. The connection between the CIA and the Finders remain highly suspicious to this day, leading many to believe that this was a covert operation to cover up the dark fucking shit. So, if you want to do some more research on that, they are called the Finders Cult. Now, I won't go into too much detail about the Finders Cult because it is actually true. It's not a conspiracy. Like, you can actually go and just search the Finders Cult, and you can do all of the research on that as you want. So I'll let you do your own research there. Or you'll probably find another podcast that will talk about the Finders Cult, like a cult podcast, and they'll probably give you a lot more information about them that's kind of relevant. So yeah, I'll let you do your own there. Next up, you got the Presidio daycare scandal. So in the late 1980s, over 60 children were reported as having been abused at a daycare located on a US Army base in San Francisco. It's always San Francisco. What's going on with this? We talked about San Francisco last week in MK Ultra. What's going on over there? Anyway, the daycare was supposed to be a safe haven for military families, but it quickly became the center of a horrific case of child exploitation. There were accusations of widespread abuse with multiple perpetrators involved, and what made this even more troubling was the fact that the US Army seemed to be doing everything they could to cover it up, of course. So despite investigations and multiple attempts to expose the truth, many believe the case was buried because of the sheer number of powerful people that were involved. And let's not forget about the mysterious and disturbing figure of Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, a former US Army officer who was allegedly involved in satanic rituals and linked to child abuse. Aquino was a psychological warfare expert, but he became notorious for his connections to ritualistic Satanism. He was the founder of the Temple of Set, a religious organization that's been accused of promoting satanic rituals, some of which allegedly involved child sacrifice. Aquino's name came up in connections with the Presidio daycare scandal, as some witnesses claim that he was involved in the abuse. While he was never charged with child abuse, the allegations surrounding his involvement with children and satanic practices are enough to make anyone question just how deep this conspiracy runs within the military and government circles. We are doing an episode on the Temple of Set very soon, by the way. So, what does it all mean? Are we really talking about a deep-seated network of abuse within the US military and government, from the Finders cult to the Presidio scandal and Aquino's satanic ties? There is a disturbing pattern emerging. And is it possible that these institutions were not only turning a blind eye to these horrific activities, but actively involved in facilitating them? The truth, as always, is a lot murkier than we'd like to believe, and the fact that these cases were either buried or heavily censored raises serious questions about the true scale of what's been happening behind closed doors. And so let's take this global, because the reality is elite paedophile networks don't stop at the US border. There is a world outside of the US, so they stretch far and wide, infecting governments, institutions, and societies around the world. It's a pattern of corruption and abuse that seems to cross continents, and the more you look, the darker it gets, honestly. So let's dive into some of the cases that have surfaced internationally, because the scale of this is not just an American problem, it's a global epidemic. So let's start with the UK, where senior government figures have been implicated in covering up some of the most disturbing abuse cases. Over the years, there have been whispers about the involvement of powerful politicians, police officers, and even royalty in a network of child abuse and trafficking. Of course, we've all heard of them. Prince Andrew. Anyway, several prominent figures have faced allegations of being part of this hidden underworld, but the cover-ups have been extensive. Victims have come forward with horrific stories only to be met with institutional silence. Take the Westminster paedophile ring, for example. Whistleblowers came forward claiming that politicians and even members of the royal family were implicated in the abuse of vulnerable children, yet when victims bravely shared their stories, they were met with institutional silence, as if their voices were simply too inconvenient to be heard. Then there's the Duncroft school scandal. Duncroft was a girls' school in Surrey, and it became a hotspot for allegations of sexual abuse that allegedly involved prominent individuals, including police officers and members of the British elite. The stories of abuse were initially brushed off, with many victims left unheard. Even as the accusations grew louder, the official investigations were either mishandled or intentionally suppressed. Then there's the infamous case of Jimmy Savile, the TV personality who was later exposed as one of the most prolific sexual predators in UK history. Savile was reportedly protected by powerful figures, including the BBC, for years, as he was able to abuse hundreds of children from hospital wards to schools, all while he maintained his status as a national treasure. It wasn't until after his death that the scale of his crimes became apparent, revealing the shocking extent of the cover-up that allowed him to operate unchecked for so long. Another unsettling example comes from the Elm Guesthouse scandal, which allegedly involved prominent politicians, law enforcement officials, and even members of the royal family. Of course, this guest house located in London was reportedly a site for child prostitution and abuse. Several victims have come forward claiming that they were sexually assaulted while being trafficked through the network linked to these high-profile figures. Despite credible allegations, this case was dismissed by many authorities as ludicrous or ignored entirely. Over the years, as documents and testimonies began to surface, it became clear that many influential individuals were involved in efforts to cover up the abuse. And of course, we have the issue of the VIP paedophile rings and British political system. The Conservative and Labour parties have both been accused of having numerous members involved in such rings, with victims claiming that high-ranking officials were complicit in both orchestrating and covering up child abuse for decades. And on the back of that, as we've all seen recently, UK, Keir Starmer, Labour have been attacked from US, from Elon Musk, etc., trying to uncover these paedophile rings. I think that maybe Elon Musk should stay a bit closer to home first, uncover all the shit that's happening in America, and then, yeah, come for the UK, man. I'm here for it. Alright, let's hop on a plane and let's move to Norway. So, a place known for its fjords, Nobel Prizes, and apparently some truly shocking scandals. In the early 2000s, a series of politicians and police officers were arrested for trafficking children. What's so disturbing here is how deep this operation ran into the very heart of law enforcement and political power. We're talking about a trafficking network that didn't just make money from sexual exploitations, but was also allegedly involved in ritual abuse. Yeah, ritual abuse. Apparently, these guys were aiming for the full package because why stop at one type of evil when you can do it all? And the worst part, this happened in Norway, a country famous for its peaceful image and progressive values and generally being awesome at everything from human rights to IKEA. I mean, this scandal absolutely shattered the image of a perfect society. The case really shook the country to its core, and you can imagine the public's reaction. People were left staring at their morning coffee like, how the bloody hell did this happen in a place that practically invented the idea of social responsibility? It's one of those moments where you start questioning if you need to reevaluate everything you knew about the world and possibly reconsider your IKEA bookshelf assembly skills too. In the end, it wasn't just about the arrests, it was about the fact that this went on for so long with people looking the other way. The truth, it's still out there, and I think we can all agree it's not a pretty picture. And then there's Portugal, a country known for its stunning beaches, fantastic wine, and a high society paedophile ring. Yep, and let me tell you, this one had a lot of influential figures. We're talking businessmen, politicians, and some familiar faces from the entertainment industry at the center of it. Yep, it's like a bad soap opera, except the plot involves the most horrific exploitation you can imagine, and you're pretty sure nobody's going to get a happy ending with this one. The victims, orphans, some as young as 6 years old, who were trafficked and abused in orphanages. These kids were the perfect prey without family or support systems, just waiting to be exploited by the very people who should have been looking out for their safety. Imagine a world where vulnerable children are treated like commodities, all because the people in charge thought that they could get away with it. And spoiler alert, they did for a long time. The case led to a huge public scandal, like a giant pinata bursting open, revealing not candy, but outrage, disbelief, and shock. But here's the kicker: many of the powerful figures involved never actually faced any real justice. It was like they had a VIP pass to the No Consequences Club. While the rest of the public was left to clean up the mess, the outrage was palpable, but the accountability, not so much. And actually, this is kind of linked to Madeleine McCann, right? So, a lot of people believe that Madeleine McCann, who went missing in Portugal, um, was actually taken to one of these orphanages, and that's how she was never found because she went through like a trafficking network. And yeah, I think that's quite plausible of an outcome of what could have happened to her, um, because to this day she's never been found. So that would kind of highlight that, in terms of she entered into a network that was kind of protected because the guest list was protected and they are VIP guests. They're powerful people, powerful entities, so they can make someone disappear. Um, I hope she's found one day. I really do. I hope she's found, and I hope she's alive. And yeah, and I hope it wasn't the parents. Right, so we can't continue without talking about the Vatican. Come on. So, the Catholic Church, the institution that's meant to be the moral compass for millions of people, has also been at the center of some of the most grotesque child abuse cases in history, as we all know. And while I'm all for some faith and redemption, the Vatican's track record, not so divine. So for decades, the church has been accused not of just enabling abuse, but actively covering it up. Um, and, I don't need to dive too much into this one. We all know we all know the thing. But let's just say they've become pretty good at the thing. Over the years, we've seen billions of euros being paid out in settlements to victims of clergy members who preyed on children. You'd think they'd stop at some point, but I mean, when you are the Vatican, when you are the church, you've got that endless checkbook, and they can always just say sorry to God and they get away with it. I mean, talk about using money to cleanse your conscience. But you know what? I believe that no amount of holy water can wash away this kind of stain. The church's handling of these cases has been nothing short of scandalous. Instead of confronting the issue head on, they shuffle abusers from parish to parish, thinking that the whole thing can just stay under the rug. Like, you're just trying to like push your laundry under the bed. Like, oh no, I want to find it under there. We'll deal with that later. And it's spanned continents. This one, I mean, come on, it's the accusation of abuse reach all corners of the globe, from the US to Australia, South America. It's just like, that parish abused someone. Oh, okay, well, we'll just move him to another one so he can do it again. Like, the fuck? And you can only imagine those are the ones that are out there that we know about. Can you imagine how many are still buried in the Vatican archives, gathering dust along with all those other ancient manuscripts no one's allowed to read? If you know what I mean. But honestly, at this point, it wouldn't surprise me if they honestly had a secret room in the Vatican with just all of the scandalous stuff happening. And when you're sworn in as the Pope, you just basically get to see all of this, and then if you say anything, you die. Pretty much. I think that's just how it goes, like a medieval fucking Netflix catalog. Like, the real shame is that we all know the truth and nothing's done about it. That's the real fucking shame. So I think with all of those examples I just gave above, it all points to this global web of abuse that is carefully hidden behind layers of power, wealth, and influence. So from the UK to Norway, Portugal, the Vatican, these cases show us that this isn't just isolated incidents. It's a much larger, far-reaching pattern of corruption, evil, and abuse that just needs to fucking stop. And now, as we move into this new age of, social media and everything is, easily accessible, then you've got to start to look at big tech, right? So big tech and the media have to now be accused of playing a pivotal role in covering up all of these exploitations, surely. So whether that's from them, like, silencing whistleblowers, suppressing crucial information, or even enabling the networks responsible for these atrocities, how are these platforms not being roped in and just being, they are now complicit in protecting the perpetrators? One of the most chilling pieces of this kind of thing is Slade Summer. So he's a well-known editor who took it upon himself to publicly debunk Pizzagate, portraying it as a baseless conspiracy and dismissing the claims outright. But you'll never guess what? Summer was later arrested for possessing child abuse material. Oop, there it is. So, someone who worked tirelessly to discredit accusations of child exploitation ended up being caught in the very same scandal he sought to dismiss. Hello, people. Wake the fuck up. Come on. And then there's Bren Cucinello, the founder of a website that was allegedly used for human trafficking, selling children to Silicon Valley executives. This is one of them that kind of hits hard because it connects the most powerful individuals in the tech world to these horrific crimes. Silicon Valley is the home to some of the world's most influential billionaires, yet Cucinello's alleged trafficking network operated right under their noses without them knowing. Right. So the executives who have the power to shape the future of the internet and digital technologies were not involved in these dark dealings. Yeah. And speaking of Silicon Valley, let's talk about one of the most iconic figures, Steve Jobs. I mean, we have to talk about it. So the late Apple co-founder is often celebrated for revolutionizing technology and consumer products, but there are also some that have raised disturbing questions about his involvement in child exploitation events. Allegations suggest that Jobs may have participated in ritualistic gatherings where children were exploited for pleasure of the elite. Obviously, these claims have no proof currently, but is it hard to wonder, did Jobs have ties to the dark side of Silicon Valley's elites? If these things were going on in Silicon Valley, Was he involved in them? And that leads us into like the social media side of things, social media censorship. The censorship specifically around Pizzagate related discussions has been a hot topic ever since the first theory gained traction, right? Platforms like Facebook, Twitter at the time, and YouTube have all been accused of silencing conversations about Pizzagate, either by removing posts or shutting down accounts that discuss it. You might ask, why the extreme censorship here? Is it just about maintaining a clean image for the tech giants? Or is it something more sinister? Are these platforms actively protecting the people in power? The same people accused of being part of exploitative networks? With social media giants controlling the flow of information, it's concerning to think about how much truth might be getting buried. I think we are moving into a better space now with social media, especially with the latest reports from Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk about X and Meta. I think that's promising, but as we've all seen, you can't trust these people, and what they say and what they do is two very different things. So what I would say is that it is pretty clear that the intersection between big tech, the media, and elite exploitation creates a very troubling ecosystem of itself. So you've got manipulation, censorship, active complicity. These institutions seem to be working overtime to ensure that the full extent of the abuse stays hidden. But as we keep peeling back layers, one thing becomes abundantly clear. There is far more to this story than we will ever be told, than we can ever imagine. And trying to uncover and expose that elite paedophilia network is no easy task. In fact, many who have tried to blow the whistle on these dark, high-powered circles have found themselves facing death, if you know what I mean. Like, so it doesn't always have to be death, but like unimaginable obstacles are put in front of them. So suppression, discrediting, outright threats. You've got Peter McKelvey. He's a former child protection officer in the UK who blew the whistle on high-profile politicians allegedly involved in child sex rings. McKelvey had been working on exposing these networks for years, and in the 2010s, he publicly named names. Like he fully went into it. Names like Lord Janner, former British Labour MP, Leon Britton, former Home Secretary, Harvey Proctor, former Conservative MP, Edward Heath, former Prime Minister of the UK. So what makes McKelvey's case so significant is not just the accusations themselves, but the institutional pushback he faced after naming these names, right? And afterwards, he told of like the great lengths they went to cover it up. He was even told by officials that the certain names that I just mentioned could not be brought into the public eye at first for the sake of national security. McKelvey's attempt to expose the truth was met with swift and brutal resistance, but his bravery inspired many others to come forward with their own stories. So you've got Andrew McLeod. He's a former UN official who dropped a bombshell of a claim that the United Nations were not only complicit in child rape, but had also actively facilitated it. McLeod alleged that while the UN was operating in countries like Haiti, it turned a blind eye to the abuse of children by peacekeepers and other officials. His accusations were a game changer because they implicated some of the highest global institutions in these heinous crimes. McLeod stated that the child trafficking networks were operating with the knowledge of UN officials, and many children were exploited as part of peacekeeping missions. McLeod's claims, of course, have been dismissed by some, but his courage in coming forward with these allegations has made waves in international human rights circles. And finally, we come to Ted Gunderson. He's a former FBI special agent whose investigations into child trafficking went far beyond the standard government narrative. Gunderson, in his late years, became one of the most vocal critics of the FBI, accusing the agency of being directly involved in trafficking operations. And tale as old as time, Gunderson said that the FBI was not only aware of child exploitations at the highest levels, but was actively participating in it. He claimed that the agency worked alongside government officials to protect those involved in trafficking rings, preventing investigations from going further and making sure that perpetrators remain untouched. So these figures, McKelvey, McLeod, and Gunderson, represent just a small fraction of many whistleblowers who've tried to shine a light on the corruption that runs rampant at the highest levels of society. But the question remains, what happens to those who keep speaking out? Will they too be silenced? Or will their efforts be catalysts for a larger movement that finally brings these abuses to an end? Now, as I mentioned at the very start, we are going to cover the Dutch Pizzagate. So let's head over to the Netherlands for a moment. So if you thought Pizzagate was just an American thing, think again. These dark, satanic, elite paedophile rings seem to have a global presence. They're like the Starbucks of conspiracy theories, popping up in every corner of the world, each one with its own special twist. And in the quaint little Dutch town of Bodegraven, there's a bizarre chapter in this whole saga that's become known as, wait for it, Bodegraven's Satanic Panic. Sounds like something straight out of an 80s slasher movie, but it's not. It's real. And let's talk about it. So back in the 80s, three men from Bodegraven started spreading a claim that would quickly become the talk of the town. According to them, a group of powerful figures, your usual suspects, politicians, businessmen, shady elites, were allegedly involved in a secret satanic pedophile ring. A ring so horrific, it supposedly involved everything from child abuse to dark rituals. And now you're probably wondering, okay, so what's the evidence? Well, this is where it gets real juicy. Well, one of the men, Juiced Neville, I think that's how you pronounce it, Juiced Neville, claimed to have had a recovered memory of these events. Yep, you heard. A memory that just so happened to emerge from the depths of his subconscious. It's like Indiana Jones, but instead of ancient artifacts, it's a town caught in a supernatural conspiracy that's somehow all tied to satanic rituals. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds a little far-fetched, you're not the only one, but as we always say, nothing is too far-fetched on this podcast. People in Bodegraven actually started believing these wild accusations, and it didn't stay as just whispers or casual coffee talk. No, people started leaving flowers at the cemetery for the supposed victims of these dark rituals. Victims who might not have even existed in reality, but in the minds of the believers, they were as real as anyone else. The cemetery became a makeshift shrine with people offering tokens of sympathy, grieving for children who had allegedly been sacrificed. And the flower situation became so overwhelming for this town that they had to like bring in skips to like take out all of the flowers. Like there were so many flowers being left. Like it wasn't just like 5 or 6. It was like so much that it was costing this town a lot of money to remove these flowers and the gifts and stuff from the cemetery, and they were being left all over this place. And just to put it in perspective, there was only like 19 to 30,000 people in this place. Like it's a really really small town, like a neighborhood almost, or like a really bad day at Disneyland. Like 19,000 people is not actually a lot of people. And these flowers became so overwhelming that like the mayor of the town or had to actually step in and just be like, guys, can we stop this? And of course the authorities weren't exactly thrilled by the growing uproar. When it did start to get completely out of control, the Dutch courts did step in, but their intervention wasn't as much about justice as it was about shutting down a narrative that could have gotten too close to a real story. In the end, they ordered the men to stop spreading their accusations, claiming that there was no evidence to back their claims. But if you look at how often these cases of satanic abuse rings have been covered up by powerful elites, the idea that authorities might want to suppress this isn't exactly a shocker, is it? I actually think one of the guys went to prison for 15 months because he didn't stop. I think they put him in prison. And now there's another woman who's spreading this again on Facebook, and she's been asked to stop. She was asked to stop like last November, and she hasn't. And I think they're threatening her with prison as well. And it's one of those things like once a conspiracy theory is out there and it's thriving, especially when it's based on real world events like ritualistic abuse or elite cover-ups, it is incredibly hard to put that back in a box. It's not just some wild fantasy anymore. Bodegraven became part of a much larger puzzle that ties into global theories about the involvement of the powerful in these dark practices. Even without hard proof, these kind of claims make people question in the very institutions they trust, right? And again, go back to Jeffrey Epstein, for example, a man with connections to the world's most powerful figures who ran a global child trafficking operation, complete with rituals and sacrifices. So maybe Bodegraven wasn't as far off as the mainstream would have had them believe. And while the authorities tried to sweep it under the rug, just like with Pizzagate, these ideas still have a way of taking root. If Bodegraven is anything like any other exposed cases, it's not the town's hysteria we should be questioning, rather than the elites who may be hiding the truth. At the end of the day, it's not just about one conspiracy or one theory. It's about exposing the powerful networks that perpetuate the exploitation of children. And while the road to justice may seem long and treacherous, it's a fight no one can afford to ignore. The stakes are too high and the lives affected are too important. So, was the Pizzagate scandal nonsense? Could be. But does that mean that we should dismiss every claim of elite corruption? That's the real question, isn't it? So some final thoughts: if you're going to investigate a conspiracy, maybe don't bring an assault rifle and shoot the place up. Also, Dutch conspiracies are just as wild as American ones, if not weirder. And finally, if a politician starts talking about their love of pizza, maybe give that statement a second look. So what do you think? Could there be more to Pizzagate than just a baseless conspiracy theory, or are there really hidden connections between powerful elites and child trafficking that go far beyond what we've seen? And if so, how deep does the rabbit hole really go? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one. Let me know what you think and let's keep the conversation going. You can let me know your thoughts in the comments or on our socials at Conspiracy. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok. You can also email me, conspiracy@gmail.com. I'm always keen to hear what you guys have to say, and who knows, your message could inspire a future episode. Conspiracy. Conspiracy. That's it for today's episode of Conspiracy, where weird is the new normal. Join us next Wednesday for a brand new conspiracy theory, and if you liked today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your conspiracy-loving mates. And remember, the truth is out there.